it is really a pleasure to welcome our speaker, Barak Sella. Barak and I were connected to each other just the week before the world changed for Israel and all of us. So it was by coincidence, and we were thinking maybe Barak would come and speak with us for Rabin's yard site, which is coming up. And then you know what happened next, and I was very grateful that Barak was still willing to come and speak to us, and we talked about how he might be able to just offer his wisdom from having grown up, as he calls it, in the shadow of Oslo. From his lived experience in Israel, he moved from Texas when he was 10, made Aliyah with his family to Israel, just 1 year before Rabin was assassinated, which, of course, deeply affected him. He had been a leader in one of Israel's most prominent youth movements and spent his adult years educating youth all over Israel about the importance of peace and democracy. He's been an activist and community organizer for many years, focusing on building bridges within communities in Israel and worldwide. He also led one of Israel's first COVID-19 volunteer response networks and the first Israeli civil humanitarian aid for Syrian refugees. Barak is here with us in the Boston area studying for his MPA at the Harvard Kennedy School. His last role was as the director of the Reut Institute, one of Israel's foremost think tanks on strategy and leadership. And during his time there, he worked with leading actors in the Israeli government and with NGOs from Israel and the US on various issues, including anti-Semitism and Israel delegitimization, Jewish peoplehood, and Israel-US relations. There's much more to say. Barak has accomplished much in his few years. He's a lot younger than I am. So I feel a little bit like I should step it up. But no, he's really accomplished, and really I'm thrilled that we can benefit from his wisdom, both just from growing up, from the time he was 10 in Israel, and doing so much, leading the way for our people in so many ways. So Barak, please come on up. And we'll let you use the mic here. And maybe like 15 and
okay,
then...
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
It'll work. Okay. Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. So, I'm not really used to talking about such like current events on Shabbat and then, in a synagogue. I think it's a time where we need to go above what's happening in our day-to-day and connect to ideas of eternity. But I think these are special times, and I hope that maybe I'll be able to share some ideas and some thoughts to help also contextualize what we're going through, right? 2 weeks ago on October 7th was, I think, probably the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. And I think that's pretty obvious. And it's not about the vast number of people who lost their lives. More people lost their lives in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. More people lost their lives in the Independence War in 1948. At the time, 6,000 people died in that war, which is 2% of the population at the time. But the big difference is that then that there were soldiers. There were people who had the ability to protect themselves. And the majority of people who lost their lives on October 7th were civilians, were people who were just trying to live out their Shabbat, live out Simchat Torah, who didn't have the ability to protect themselves. And I'm a third generation to Holocaust survivors from my whole family. I have over 20 close relatives who lost their lives in the Holocaust, like I'm sure some of the people in this room as well. And we, built the state of Israel not as a theoretical idea to make sure that Jewish civilians are never killed in their home just for the fact that they are Jewish. And we failed that day. We failed on our very important mission. So it's important to understand why we failed and what we need to do now. So thank you, Rabbi, for that sort of intro, and I won't talk a lot about myself, but I do want to contextualize a bit just to understand how did we get to where we are, right? And I'll tell it a bit through my perspective. So I was born in Texas. I moved Israeli parents, and I moved to Israel back when I was 10. 1 year before the Rabin assassination. One of the years my parents moved back was because after Rabin came to power in 1992, there was a lot of optimism. I remember as a kid in Israel, in my first year, people would say, you know, maybe by the time you're 18, you won't need to go to the army. And that was 30 years ago. I remember we went to a trip with class, with school, to the Golan Heights to say goodbye to the Golan Heights, because maybe in a year or two we're going to give it back to the Syrians for peace. And when Rabin was assassinated, I was very young. I was only 10 and a half. I understood that from that moment, things are going to look different in Israel. And the dream for peace was not over after his assassination by a extremist right-wing religious Jew, Israeli. But the times weren't simple. When I was in high school, of course, started the Second Intifada, which I think to understand Israel, you have to understand the Second Intifada, because the Second Intifada, especially for my generation, let's say millennials in Israel, was a turning point. Was a turning point where we really felt, and I grew up in a very liberal community in Israel, and a community that was committed to peace. But even in my community, we went through the Second Intifada feeling that maybe this can't work. And that's a hard realization, right? Because Israel has always been a nation that strives for peace. That's even in our Megillat Atzmaut, in our Independence Declaration. It says that when we founded the State of Israel, it says we reach out to our Arab neighbors in offer of peace. And people say a lot of things about Israel in the news, but Israel has done peace with its neighbors. We have done peace now with 6 Arab countries. We also have some relations with countries that we don't have peace with. So we want to do that. But it's a hard realization to figure out, well, maybe it's a bit more complicated. And how do we live in that sort of reality? And after sort of at the tail end of the Second Intifada, I joined the army. I got into a very prestigious intelligence unit, but I was young and stupid and decided to go to a combat unit instead. My parents didn't like that, but they had no choice. And I went on a special track that I did 2 years of combat service and 1 year of education. And I'm telling you this because it's very relevant to what's happening today. So I joined the army in August 2004, and in the summer of 2005, Israel decided to evict the Gaza Strip, the Jewish settlements that were in the Gaza Strip, Gush Katif, Netzarim, and the northern settlements. About 25,000 Jews, Israelis, lived in the Gaza Strip. And in 2005, Ariel Sharon, the Israeli government, decided to start the disengagement. And there were huge protests in Israel around this. It was very controversial. Many people tried to stop it, but many people supported it. Because at the time, and I will tell you, I had my conflicting views, because I didn't think personally that we had to have settlements in the Gaza Strip. But I also didn't want Israel to do one-sided actions, because that is not peace. I thought that when we evict the Gaza Strip, it will be part of a peace agreement, not as part of unilateral actions. But still, at the time, I thought that it was the best we can do, because people were dying in Gaza Strip, and we were spending our resources for something that didn't make sense. And we hoped that it would change Israel's standing on the international stage and maybe help us position ourselves towards peace. That was the rationale of the people who supported it. But people also had to do that. And that's what sometimes is hard to understand, that the prices are not only prices of war, they're also prices of peace. And every decision that is made in the region comes at a price, not only a political price, but a personal price. So first of all, settlers in the Gaza Strip had to leave their homes. You could not agree that they live there, that they need to live there, but they lived there. It was their home, and they had to leave their homes. Secondly, someone had to evict them. And then, I don't know if unfortunately or fortunately, that job was put on us, me and my unit, and in summer of 2005, and we trained for this, and we participated in the disengagement. So the first time I was in Gaza, I was there as a soldier protecting the settlements, and next time I was in Gaza, I came as a soldier without a gun, with a hat and with the flag of Israel to evict Jewish settlers from their house. And I evicted the last house in Netzarim. And it was one of the hardest moments of my life. Because, and again, I thought I was doing the right thing. But that's the complexity of our life, that sometimes doing the right thing maybe is not the moral thing. It is not moral to evict someone from their house, from their home. You can say, you can give all the political reasonings for why they don't need to be there. But to take someone with force from their home is not a moral thing to do in my eyes. Even though I thought then, and I still think now, that it was the right thing to do. And that's the complexity. What if sometimes the right thing to do is not the moral thing to do? Or there are moral issues, like war. War is not a moral action. That demands you. There is no such thing as the law of war. There is, but there is no right way to do war. There's no, it comes with a cost to protect your home, to protect your family. And that's a complexity we need to be in. When someone comes to attack you, you have to respond. In what way do you respond? Is there a moral way to respond? Maybe there's a right way to respond, but the morality is ambiguous, and you have to enter the realm of moral ambiguity. That's what it demands. When I finished, as part of my service, I was also in education corps, and so I worked as an educator in Sderot, city that people have heard of recently, and I worked there during the Second Lebanon War, working with kids in bomb shelters. And after I finished the army, I decided I want to be an educator, and I stayed to live there. And I lived in Ashkelon, and I worked with my friends as an educator in all the kibbutzim that you've heard in the news. I worked in kibbutz Nir Am specifically. All my friends worked in Re'im, Kfar Aza, Nir Oz, Nachal Oz. I lived there for 4 years in that area. So many of the people that have been kidnapped, killed, injured are people that I know, are friends of mine, unfortunately. Family of friends. Many people I know, thank God, were there but survived, including, I don't know if you heard about the woman who saved the kibbutz Nir Am. I was her counselor, so I'm very proud of her. So it's all very personal, right? But looking forward, right, I'm not going to give a full analysis of what happened from Israel from the moment we left Gaza 17 years today. There's no time for that. But I'll just say that in that time, Israel has changed deeply. Israel has become a divided country. We saw that in the past 9 months. Israel has become a country that, unfortunately, many people didn't believe or lost their faith in peace, and mainly focused on managing the situation. And managing the situation is, in my opinion, also what brought us to this tragic time. So what happened on October 7th? Why did it happen? How did it happen to the strongest military in the region? And that's a question people are asking. And a lot of people are saying we need to finish the war and then we'll ask. And I think no, I think we need to deal with this now. And I think there are some things that we need to say about what's happening now. First of all, there were 3 failures. There was a military failure. Our soldiers did not succeed in their mission, which is to protect civilians. There was an intelligence failure. Our intelligence did not figure out the plan of the enemy. And there was a leadership failure. Our leaders did not take responsibility. Our leaders did not do the right actions to protect their citizens. And it's something important for me to say now, and I'll say this probably a few more times. This war that we're now engaging in is not with the Palestinian people. It's with a terror organization as defined by the EU and by the US, Hamas, a terror organization that is based on the radical ideas of the Islamic Brotherhood. The Islamic Brotherhood, which is hated more by Egypt than by Israel. And it's not with the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people and the Israeli people will live side by side no matter what anyone wants and no matter what anyone thinks. That is our destiny. So why did Hamas attack? Well, for several reasons. First of all, and most of all, I think, in my opinion, was because of the talks about peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The worst thing for Hamas is normalization between Israel and the most important Muslim nation in the world. And that's, first of all, why they had, and they've been preparing this attack for over a year, some say even 2 years. But whoever is involved in this area knows that talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia have been going on for years, and especially ever since the Abraham Accords 3 years ago. So that's the reason that they started. They knew that they had to do something extreme to prevent this. And by the way, Hamas knew that such an extreme attack would bring on such an extreme response by Israel. They made that choice. That's important to remember. They made a strategic choice. They planned for this. This wasn't a, emotional reaction. It was a strategic, planned, very thoughtful event, and that they had time to think what would happen, what response. So everything is now happening according to their plan. They sensed that Israel was weak, maybe because after 9 months of internal strife and protests, and they identified that Israel was fooled, because there was an idea in Israel that Hamas is our weakest enemy. Our more dangerous enemies are Hezbollah from the north or Iran. And Hamas is the least of our problems, and we can deal with Hamas, because either Hamas every few years will do a small round, it'll be fine and we'll continue with our lives, or we can maybe appease them. I don't know how many people know this, but in the recent year, Israel has granted tens and tens of thousands of work permits for Gazans. People say this talking point of Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. 250 trucks of supplies go from Israel every day into Gaza. Israel provides most of the electricity. Israel provides most of the water. So it's more complicated. And the idea of the Israeli government was, if we provide the Gazans with work permits and with better lives, then Hamas maybe will want to focus on improving the lives of the Gazans and not of fighting Israel. And they fooled us. They sent us that message, and they didn't participate in the former rounds, which was Islamic Jihad. They put us to sleep, and it worked for them. But it also exposed their true nature as an organization, that it's more important for them to be committed to their goal of destroying Israel than to take care of the welfare of Gazans. And that's something that now we understand, and now we have to deal with that reality. What happened in Israel is a game changer. It's not the same Israel. That also might be a good thing in the long run. My hope for the situation is maybe this is the last war between Israel and Palestine. Maybe out of this terrible conflict will be the opportunity that will bring forward peace. That might be. That's what happened after the Yom Kippur War. We had the most terrible war with Egypt, and a few years later we were able to sign a peace agreement, and since then Israelis and Egyptians for nearly 50 years have not been killing each other. And that's a huge, and Israelis and Egyptians have killed more of each other than Israelis and Palestinians. So things can change. Our enemy here, as I said again, is not Palestinians, but Iran. And again, not the Iranian people, but the regime in Iran that has said on multiple events that it wants to annihilate Israel. That's something that we now need to take those threats as they are, and not say, oh, it's rhetoric, oh, it's No, we saw this on October 7th. If Hamas wasn't stopped, would they have stopped killing people? If there wasn't an army eventually that got its things together and was able to stop the attack, what would have Hamas done? Would have stopped? It would have continued. That's what I've been saying to my friends at Harvard. If Hamas would have only attacked the bases on the border, okay, then I would say we have a deal with a military or a state that can be reasoned with. But no, after they conquered the military bases, they continued to the houses, to the kids, to the parties, to every place that they could. And kidnapping, and I won't repeat the atrocities, I'm sure you've heard enough of it. So what can we do now? Those are good questions, and I don't have good answers, and I don't think anyone has. But what is clear is that we need to do something to make sure that this cannot happen again. I saw that many people are calling for a ceasefire, and believe me, I want a ceasefire as well. But I want a ceasefire that, I don't want a ceasefire that gives me no promise that this can't happen again. The whole southern of Israel is demolished. Not the whole, but the Gaza border, these beautiful kibbutzim. By the way, these people, I have the privilege to study at the Kennedy School, and I have many friends from all over the world, including from many Arab countries. And I was talking to a friend of mine from Egypt, and I was telling him, these people that Hamas killed, they are the most liberal people in Israel. And they're not the liberal people who live in Tel Aviv and don't care about anything. These are people who went to live on the Gaza border because under missiles, because they believe in peace, truly, because they see it as their mission to live next to Gaza. And these are the people. Not that it matters if they were right-wing settlers from the West Bank. Not that it matters. But to put it in context, one of my colleagues, she was made Aliyah also from the US. She's in her, I think, pushing 80, peace activist, now kidnapped in Gaza. A peace activist. One of my best friends, his sister and husband were killed. They founded a Arab-Jewish school. They founded an Arab-Jewish school. So we understand who we are now working against, and we need to make a decision. We need to make hard decisions. And they're not, they're morally ambiguous, like I said. I won't go into tactics and what we need to do, but I will say it's going to be long. I will say the support that Israel is getting from the US is priceless. I think most Israelis would tomorrow replace Netanyahu with Biden as their prime minister, including myself. I wrote something about, I don't know if you saw this story about Rachel from Ofakim. You've heard about this. Rachel, she's just a, Jewish mom in Ofakim. And 4 terrorists of Hamas came into her house and held her and her husband on gunpoint. What do you do in that situation? Most of us would panic, and she did not panic. She saw them as who they are, and she asked them, other than being what do you do in life? And they said, we do jihad. It's like, oh, other than jihad, what do? You like movies? Maybe you're hungry. Offered them coffee, offered them cookies. At the same time, her son and his team from a SWAT team, from a police SWAT team, were outside their house, and she could see them. And she kept distracting the terrorists with her humanity, singing songs to them, telling me, teach me Arabic, I'll teach you Hebrew, giving them cookies, and at the same time making gestures with her hand on her face to her son. And eventually saved her life and her husband, and the SWAT team came and were able to save them. And Israel is obsessed now with this woman. Why? And by the way, she met Biden a few days ago and they hugged. And why are people now obsessed with Biden and with Rachel? Well, because they showed something that we're looking for, which is compassion, humility, but strength and resilience and determination. And that doesn't go through yelling and pounding on your chest. It goes through following through and connecting between what you say and what you do. And that's what Rachel is. She's a woman who used what she had, her motherly instincts, to save her life. And I think that's very inspiring. And I think that in this dark time, very dark time, and I want to address the Palestinians in Gaza are suffering deeply under a regime that is a terrorist regime. And unfortunately, I understand all the people protesting for Palestine now in the US and all over the world. I understand them. I think that if they would really care for the lives of the Palestinians, they would try to free them from Hamas instead of encouraging them to continue going on with wars in Israel, because that's only sending more Palestinians for their deaths. And if they really cared for Palestinians, they wouldn't call for the river to the sea, but they would call for peace with Israel, instead of calling and encouraging them to continue fighting with Israel. Because Israel, as Golda Meir said, we have nowhere to go. That is the truth. So I'll just summarize and say there's an idea of Yigal Allon. He was one of Israel's leading political leaders. And he had this idea, it's called Gvulot Barei Hagana, borders that you can protect. And it sounds like a military idea, right? Okay, how do you fortify your borders? But it's not. It's actually a humanistic idea. Because if you want to live in peace, you have to create a reality that deters the extremists on the other side from attacking you. That is the reality all over the world, especially in the Middle East. We will always have people, extremists, who will want to oppose peace, who will not want the state of Israel. That is a fact that we need to accept. But to have peace, we have to create borders that we can protect. And that's also physical borders, but that's also ideas that are strong, like democracy, that can't be broken. It's an economy that can't be broken. And it's also a spirit of people who can't be broken. And that's I think the point of light that we're seeing now in Israel. We're seeing an amazing, astonishing mobilization, not only for the reserve units, but by civil society, people supporting each other. There isn't anyone who's not doing something, who is not actively taking a part. If it's buying clothes and giving haircuts to people who lost their homes, or if it's creating makeshift nurseries, or if it's sewing taliot, tzitziot, religious soldiers. I heard this. I have a friend. She told me religious soldiers, tzitzit, it's white, but when you're in the army, it has to be black or green. So there was a shortage of tzitziot. And so you have people all over the world buying these shirts, tactical shirts, cutting them up, sewing them together, so that the religious soldiers can have their tzitziot, So, because there's no warehouse with 30,000 tactical tzitziot. So anyways, that's my thoughts, just some, maybe some optimism going forward. And again, we will do what we need to do, but our prayer for peace is always in our hearts.
Amen, amen. Yeah. Barak, thank you so much. Yeah. I'm mindful of time. I know Barak just has a few minutes, so I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions just here now, and then Barak will need to go, but I feel that you're probably open to people getting in touch of course. If they have some any questions or anything. So I can certainly share your email.
Yes, sure.
You can get in touch with me if you want to get in touch with Barak. But for
Yeah.
now, I'm going to invite just a few questions here in the room, and then maybe one or two on Zoom as well before Barak will go. We'll close our service, and then we'll have an oneg just for some schmoozing among us. And we can, of course, reflect together on this wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Saul, go ahead.
So we're going to give you a microphone.
Okay.
Before anything else can happen in Israel.
So that's the dilemma, and I'll tell you what I think about it. Hamas is a military movement, organization. It's also a political movement. I'm not sure that it can be eliminated in a one-off military operation. I think that in the military operation, Israel can severely harm them and reduce their capabilities. Politicians in Israel have been saying for years, we need to eliminate Hamas. It's lip service. Now they've been saying it, but still, we're after 13, 14 days. There still hasn't been a ground assault. The reason is not that Israel isn't ready. Everything is ready. The reason is there's not a good enough plan. And leaders of Israel aren't yet convinced, and we'll see them go in when they have a good plan. But I think that even after that happens, Hamas, I don't know how much support. No one really knows how much support they have in Gaza, but they do have support. They do have actual support. It might be 20%, it might be 40%, it might be 60%. I don't know. So I think what we're going to see is a possibly longer operation that might be different from what we saw in the past. It might be soldiers going in and out, in for a week, out for a week, and then in for a week from another area, special forces. It might be a long act to deter them from military actions, and maybe they'll remain a political organization.
Well,
Thank you.
Israel won't know if it doesn't try.
I think we're going to see them try.
Yeah. Thank you, Saul. Another question from the room. Susan, and then Karen. Well, Susan, we're going to bring you the mic. Just one sec. Thank you, Karen.
You had actually referred to ceasefire. In your comments, what would make that possible in your mind? What conditions?
I'm not sure there is a condition yet, to be honest, because I think that there are two objectives now. One is to decapitate Hamas's military abilities and to make sure that they won't have the ability to do what they just did. And the second is to return the hostages. The problem is these two objectives are contradictory. That's the problem. And now you have to make a decision. If Israel would want to focus more on the hostages, then they would have to do everything, and a ceasefire would come after we get our 200 hostages back. If Israel decides to emphasize more on destroying Hamas, then a ceasefire will come after Israel feels that Hamas doesn't have the ability to do what they have done. Now that might manifest in different ways. It might be through Hamas leadership, like it happened in the first Lebanon war. All the PLO, send them off to Tunisia. So maybe all the Hamas leadership, 1,000 people, send them to Qatar. Leave them there. That's an option. But just a ceasefire for with no guarantees is just because it's something that's right. Why is it right? Of course it's right. It's not right to fire on anyone. War is not right. But what do you do? And that's something that I've been asking all week. I've been asking people, what is the right, what should we do? What's the proportionate thing? Again, it's not about proportions, it's about objectives. So what's the right thing to do? What's for a democratic country to do? So I don't see a ceasefire anytime soon, unless one of these objectives are met.
Thank you. Karen.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much for this. I've been hearing a lot about a two-state solution. This has been floated for
Yeah.
many, many years. What's your take on that?
So I'm a supporter of the two-state solution, but I think that it's clear for many people in Israel and in Palestine that the conditions weren't sort of available. Now, there's the one-state solution. It's a fringe solution. There are very few people who want to do that in Israel, because it's either far people on the left who want a non-Jewish state, just some kind of fantasy state, and people on the right, far right, who want an apartheid state. And that's also not going to happen. So then most people split into two camps. You had the two-state solution where people were saying, yeah, it's the ideal solution. I know it's not possible, but we need to hold that ideal. And then you had, I think, the most popular camp, which was the not doing anything solution. Let's just manage the occupation, let's manage the conflict, and take it. And it worked for the past 20 years. Israel, after the Second Intifada, has become a booming economy. We had less deaths than any other decades. So up until 2 weeks ago, that concept, even if you could say it doesn't make sense because it's not a solution, well, it worked up until it didn't work. What will happen now? I don't know if we're going to see a two-state solution, but possibly, everyone knows that there is going to be a military action now, but long-term there's going to be some kind of diplomacy. And again, like I said, my hope is that this might be the last war between Israelis and Palestinians. And that maybe, the people who managed the occupation, managed the conflict, their idea was, well, the conditions now are not ideal. The conditions will change one day, and they thought they would do that through the Abraham Accords in Saudi. Like they said, okay, we'll normalize with everyone, and then there will be a situation we'll be able to do it. Unfortunately, the scenario played out that maybe the conditions changing are coming not through our slow peace agreements, but through a violent act. And I feel that I don't know if we're going to see a two-state solution, but I feel that after the dust settles, and it might be in a year, it might be in 5 years, we're going to see some kind of solution. That's my hope, at least.
We hope so. Thank you. Madeline, and then Jean. And just, you have like 3 minutes?
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
No
Okay, then
pressure.
maybe I shouldn't ask my question.
You can ask it.
Do you not think that the Palestinian people have a legitimate grievance against Israel?
Oh, for sure.
Do you
For
think
sure.
a lot of Israelis think that?
Yes. Look, no country is perfect. I can go through the list of every country in the world and the war crimes that they committed. I can go through all the atrocities that the Palestinians committed. I can go through all the list of things that the Palestinians have done to fail peace, and I can do the things that Israel has done. And I have a long list yes, of course they have grievances against Israel. Of course. That's not the question, I think, in the moment. Because the fact that they have grievances doesn't change that. At the end, we're going to have to do something. And, they always say peace you do with your enemies. Yes, Israelis and Palestinians have been in constant war. I think the difference is, and as was in the intro, I study at Harvard, and we've been in the news because about how the conversations on campus, and my biggest criticism against the administration was I didn't expect the president of Harvard to say I stand with Israel, but I expected them to realize what Hamas did as a terrorist attack. They crossed a red line. Even firing rockets on civilians for 15 years, you can say it's crossing a red line, but then you can say, well, you have Iron Dome, well, you have shelters. At this moment, you realize that the game is different. And now, again, you can go back and you can say, oh, but what about the occupation for 50 years, and what about but we offered in 47, okay, yes, that's all true. The context is true. But the reality is that we need to make decisions now. And again, like I said, the Hamas made a decision when it attacked Israel to put its people in danger. No military leader, and Hamas is not sometimes it's confusing when you say terrorist organization. This is an enemy state, Hamas. They have a large army of about 40,000, 50,000 soldiers. They are trained. They're not ragtag. They are trained. They're commando. They made a decision that many of their people will lose their lives. That was their decision that they made.
Thank you. And in their charter, they expressly call for the destruction of Israel. And before that, it also called for the destruction of Jews in general.
Yeah,
right?
I want to emphasize, at the end there will only be a diplomatic goal. But that's sort of the moral ambiguity of how do you, in a region where you have enemies and you also have people that you need to live with, how do you navigate that? It's very difficult.
I think it's important to emphasize what you were talking about what is that red line.
Yeah.
I think what is incredibly terrifying and disheartening, that's too weak a word, but for many of us here or outside of Israel, is that, is that thinking or somehow implying or saying explicitly that barbaric acts of terrorism are a justifiable response to grievances of the Palestinians, and that institutions, public schools and universities are not willing to say this kind of terror, which by definition is against civilians, is unacceptable, and targeting the most vulnerable civilians and filming it and being gleeful about it, there is a line there.
I want to say something about that, because Israel in the past 2 weeks has, of course, also been killing civilians. But I want to say what the difference is. And it doesn't mean that it's less tragic. But the difference is, for the past 9 months, me and my friends have been fighting and protesting in Israel to keep our democracy intact and keeping our judicial system independent. Every attack that Israel sends now, you have to remember, is approved legally and is reviewed by a legal advisor and by an independent judiciary system that we fought for 10 months. We have people in Israel who wanted this judiciary system to not be independent so they can do whatever they want. That's why we fought for this, because we knew that when we go to war, and we're Israelis, we knew that the war would happen one day, that we need to have, and when Hamas attacks, they don't have a judge, maybe Sharia, but they don't have a legal advisor that says, well, are we attacking civilians or not, and what are the risks? And that's something to remember, and that's what it means. That's why no two democracies never went to war with one another.
Thank you. And, plans were found of Hamas. Not only did they target everybody who was the most innocent, but schools, nurseries were in the plans to be, if they had gotten further, God forbid, those are the people they're specifically out to attack. So I want to take one more question, if you for 2 more minutes.
Sure.
So Jean, if we can get the mic, thank you so much, Carrie, and then we'll let Barak go. But I know, again, if there are other questions, anyone on Zoom or here, let me know, and I'll pass them along to you.
Sure.
I know that Israel has to negotiate with Hamas, but Hamas is also supported by splinter organizations. Does Hamas have a control over the other supporters?
More or less, yes. At the end, Hamas is, yes, Islamic Jihad, they're a rogue organization, but they are very small and very weak compared to Hamas. We need to look at Hamas. They are the government. They are the sovereign of the Gaza Strip. They were elected in 2006. They didn't do any elections since then. I wonder why. But they were elected democratically in 2006. In 2007, there was a civil war in Gaza. They pushed out all the rival factions, including throwing off roofs, people from the Palestinian Authority. And since then, for 17 years, Hamas is, and even if they don't have, we need to treat them as such, because we've got all the proof that they have the ability to control what happens in Gaza. And look, they are under siege. Again, they claim to be in the world's largest open-air prison. They've been able to build a pretty impressive army under siege, very impressive, with about an arsenal of somewhere between 50 to 150,000 high-grade missiles and a network of, I think I heard that somewhere between 400 and 500 kilometers of tunnels. Tunnels are very hard to build. They require a lot of labor, planning, equipment. So that shows the priorities and their abilities, and I think they do have the ability to control all these other factions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough, Barak. This was really helpful framing for us, I think, and giving us context for this incomprehensible moment. And I hope we'll see you back here again.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
and
Shalom.
again, we pray for our Hatufim. Todah.